The Sandy and Toddcast is a Mindgarden Media podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. We continue to roll through the season that's all about Bigfoot, and I guess this time it's my turn, huh?
The tables have turned, Todd. It is your turn this week. I feel so weird sitting here without notes and papers in front of me, but yes, it is your turn.
We're talking Bigfoot in Wisconsin, primarily Bigfoot in northern Wisconsin and southern upper Michigan, but we'll be getting to that. This is Season 6, Episode 5, The Sandy and Toddcast, the Bigfoot Chronicles continue. It's next on The Sandy and Toddcast.
Crowds, arguments, loud noises, narcissists, energy vampires. Does that seem scary to you? It can to an empath. Sandy and Todd from the Sandy and Toddcast invite you to join them for a new podcast, the Empathicary Podcast. These two empaths know exactly what it's like, and they'd like to share their stories, knowledge, and ideas with you. Dive deep into the world of the empath. The Empathicary Podcast with Sandy and Todd. Find it anywhere you find your podcasts and like them on Facebook.
Broadcasting from two very different yet magical places not found on any map. Get ready to discuss the strange, weird, ghostly, crazy, spooky, and odd things that take place around us each and every day. All while having a little bit of fun. This is the Sandy and Toddcast.
And welcome to the Sandy and Toddcast. She is Sandy.
He is Todd.
And it's another episode about Bigfoot.
You know, I've gotten a lot of really great feedback on this. I wasn't really sure. I really like the idea of us breaking it into smaller seasons for a lot of reasons. And one of them just being, it's much easier to focus when you've got a smaller amount of episodes per season, and the theme idea I love. But I was a little bit torn with the Bigfoot because not everybody is all about cryptozoology or myths and not everybody is about that. A lot
Correct.
of people just like the paranormal stuff. But I have to say that I have gotten some really good feedback. And in a few weeks when we wrap up the season, I did get one message from one of our listeners, a friend of ours from our Stay Weirdos group, Chris. And Chris gave an opinion that or maybe it's a what if, a couple of what ifs about who or what Bigfoot may be. And I have to say, I kind of agree. Without giving too much away, I kind of have to agree that we may need to think about the path that was brought up. So we'll talk about that in a few weeks. But this week, it's all about Bigfoot in Wisconsin, which I'm interested in because we spent quite a bit of time in northern Wisconsin last summer when Dave and I came out to visit. And I'm kind of interested. It is very conducive, I would say, to a Bigfoot. And as we joked about last week, Bigfoot is pretty prevalent up there. There's even this huge Bigfoot statue that you forced me to take my picture with, which was very cute. But yeah, so I'm really interested in this episode.
Well, I'll just say that in doing my research, I did find only one out of 150 reports of Bigfoot in Door County, but there was one there. So, and it turned out to be a very good report from somebody who was a very well-educated individual and who had lived there for a long time and did a lot of hunting. And this was something that, quite frankly, scared the hell out of him.
You know, I tend to really gravitate towards the hunters in this instance. I'm not specifically a hunting fan, but I understand hunting, and I do understand the passion that they have for hunting. And so they're the ones out in the wooded areas and the marshy areas. And they know nature. They really know nature. And so you have to kind of give them a little bit more credence than, not necessarily saying anything negative, but, an 18-year-old couple out in the woods making out. It's kind of a little bit different to me.
Yeah.
So very, very interesting. Hunters. I do tend to gravitate towards the hunters when it comes to Bigfoot stories.
Well, getting started in Wisconsin, the big thing is, if you spend time in the North Woods, and Sandy has mentioned this before, it's really about adventure. It's about relaxation. It's really, that's what the North Woods of Wisconsin is really all about, getting away from the everyday. Right. And it always has kind of been that way. And Bigfoot hotspots in Wisconsin are prevalent. There have been 105 sightings according to the BFRO in Wisconsin. And it's not the highest at all. Texas, I believe, may be one of the highest at 253, although I see Ohio, and I don't understand this. Ohio has 318. Why a Bigfoot would want to be there, other than the fact that they're all pretty much backwards in Ohio.
I'm not really sure about that.
Florida's also a high one, but at 105, Wisconsin has a respectable number of Bigfoot sightings here in the state. Now, 5 Bigfoot sightings have been reported in Marinette County. Marinette County is on the very northern border of Wisconsin, and on the very other side of it is Menominee County, Michigan. So it's like a Twin Cities situation, except it's in 2 states. The most recent was back in 2013. A retired police officer there witnessed what they thought was a Bigfoot crossing a highway near the town of Pembine. Other sightings in that area northwest of Crivets, which is a large expanse of wetlands in that area, and hardwood forest is another area. Price, Vilas, and Oneida counties, all very big with Bigfoot. Now, a couple of weeks ago, again, my team went up to do some ghost hunting at a very well-known place in Wisconsin called Summer Wind. That is up near the Land O'Lakes area. And let me tell you that I never put the two together, but there have been reports in that area as well of a Bigfoot. And I think about that area. It's just beautiful. It is. Yeah. That whole Land O'Lakes tells you all you need to know about it. It's lakes, it's woods, it's cottages, it's that kind of lifestyle. So knowing that there's been a report up there does not surprise me in the least bit. I would suspect that there would be something like that up there.
And you know what's funny about that is when you mentioned Summer Wind, before when you guys went up there, I didn't understand a lot about Bigfoot. But now that I do, I think about Summer Wind being reportedly one of the most haunted places in the United States, and a Bigfoot sighting.
Right.
Is there a tie-in? I don't know, but I do find that interesting. So, And the other thing that is interesting about that one, Todd, is that obviously when you live in a city, you're not going to see much wildlife. People say, oh, well, why is it just in these heavily wooded areas and, away from civilization? Well, you don't see much regular wildlife in the cities or even in towns for that matter, in the United States, unless it's a very small rural town. But yeah, so it makes sense that there would be more sightings in these more rural areas of the United States.
So the most recent sighting in Vilas County was in December of 2013. That is up in that area. Property owner found compelling footprints in some deep snow at Black Oak Lake. That is just west of Land O'Lakes. So that was the sighting there. And in adjacent Oneida County, sightings have been reported near Woodruff, Enterprise, and the Willow Flowage. And that whole area there is full of campsites and shorelines and islands and all that kind of stuff. More civilized quarters can be rented at Willow Wood Lodge. I wanted to mention that because a lot of people who go on hunts in Wisconsin up in that area, Willow Wood Lodge is the place they stay. So there's actually, a market for selling to Bigfoot hunters in that area.
They cater to Bigfoot hunters up there. That's pretty cool.
Another hotspot is Price County. That is near the Flambeau River. There's an area up there called Lac du Flambeau, Lake of the Flames, and there's a Native American group up there as well. So a lot of the areas that we're talking about have been inhabited by Native Americans. They had a very strong heritage in those areas. And the stories go back that far. Now, the BFRO only handles like reports of now. It doesn't go back that far. They don't talk about reports that may have come from Native Americans or settlers here from France or any of that kind of stuff. That's not what they do. So the fact that you don't take that into consideration in some of their reports, stories of Bigfoot or Bigfoot creatures go way back in this area.
You know, that's a really good point that I didn't think about. When I first saw that there have been approximately 10,000 reported Bigfoot sightings in the United States, I thought, geez, that's awfully low. But you're not taking into account the fact that that's more modern times.
Right.
And also that some people are embarrassed or afraid and they don't want to report this stuff. So that's a great point. I mean, think of all the Native Americans and the early settlers who may have had, who do they tell? How is that going to get handed down from generation to generation, except orally by mouth, but there's no written records of it. So it makes sense.
We're going to talk a little bit about 3 specific episodes that happened within the last couple of years as my evidence of what goes on in Wisconsin. But I did want to mention, you talked a little bit about like current years and not wanting to talk about it and people that keep the stories to themselves. There was a gentleman in Wisconsin called Craig Salk, and he was in northern Wisconsin. He was up in that Marinette Menominee area, that line between Wisconsin and Michigan, northern Michigan. And in his life, he encountered a Bigfoot. And this was back in 2012. And he had some of those hunting cameras, which is a great way to catch a lot of stuff, whether you're hunting ghosts or you want to know what's running around on your land. And he believes that they caught a picture of a Bigfoot up there. Now, the reason why I bring him up is it was so compelling to him that he started doing hunts where people would come to him and they would go out and do these hunts and stuff like that. And he was so well known. But the first thing that they say when they tell his story is that the first thing that happened once his story hit the airwaves, and he had all the, Discovery was calling him and all the local stations wanted to hear his Bigfoot story and all that kind of stuff. The first thing that happened to he and his wife was the phone would not stop ringing with all the people who had stories of Bigfoot in that area. And you're right. A lot of people don't want to talk about it. But in this case, they finally had somebody to talk to about it who believed them and could help them maybe understand what they may have seen.
There seems to be this huge stigma, and we can parallel that to the paranormal world and to having abilities that, I grew up, I didn't really like to mention my abilities because there was the stigma attached to it about, fortune tellers and these crazy psychics and they're this and they're that and you can't believe anything they say. And so you just don't talk about it. And so I think that, and it's changed a bit. And I think that's why we're hearing more stories coming out about any of this stuff, because the stigma has kind of changed a bit. The paranormal world and even the Bigfoot world has become sort of in vogue nowadays. And, everybody's really interested in that stuff. But back then, you were kind of crazy if you said you saw Bigfoot or you saw this or you did this or you can do this. So that's pretty interesting. You can draw some parallels there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that has helped is technology to a certain extent. We always laugh about the grainy videos and grainy photos. And even in my research in the last couple of years, some of the photos that came up is like, oh, come on. That could be anything. That could be somebody's finger poking out of a piece of lettuce for all I know, right? But it does help. And you see some of these trail cameras. I had a friend of mine just send me their trail cameras from northern Georgia, and there were like 5 or 6 videos, and there's freaking black bear walking next to his house. And they're really clear and you can really tell. So I think technology has helped not only capture some of the evidence, but also communicate with other people like you. So it's not something that you had to hold on to and be fearful of actually opening your mouth and saying those words. You could type it up and discuss it with people. Right. Sad news about this gentleman. I just will say this. He passed away last year, sadly, but the outpouring of love to he and his family at that time was incredible because of his background and what he did for people in that part of the state who
That's
were
great.
Bigfoot, believers. So in Wisconsin, 105 sightings. Some of the big counties for sightings here in Wisconsin: Bayfield, again, way up north. Washington County. Now, this one's kind of interesting. So, where Milwaukee is and where Oshkosh is. Washington County is between Milwaukee and Oshkosh. So it's actually in the southern part of the state, but they've had 5 sightings of Bigfoot. Waukesha, which is, again, that's right next to Milwaukee. That's had 4, which is still...
Isn't that near the Mars Cheese Castle?
That's a little bit south of that. It's south of that. But yeah.
So that's going down into Illinois almost. That's right over the border, Waukesha, like right near the border.
If you see where Milwaukee is, it's right to the west of Milwaukee.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, the where the Cheese Castle is and stuff like that, that's just south of Milwaukee. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about an area that is relatively urban. If you remember in the last year or so, the very bad news last year of the Christmas parade and the guy that drove through the parade and killed people, that happened in Waukesha. So I was surprised to see that many in places like that. One of the big ones, of course, as I mentioned already, was Marinette County, which is right on the border with Menominee County in Michigan. And that one has had 9. So out of the 105, those are the big hot spots in Wisconsin. The majority of the hotspots are in northern Wisconsin. Now, we talked about Door County because you were here. They actually had a Class B, was way back in April of 2003. This guy's hunted for 5 years, has lived in Door County for a long time. Here's the story. There's a thicket beside his house, okay? Kind of some trees and stuff, not really big woods, but kind of a thicket, meaning basically trees that are medium size in that area. And his report said, I saw a reddish brown being. He could peer into the thicket and he could see through the thicket. The thing was looking back at him as it banged its shoulder against a tree and made noise.
Oh.
So he got curious about it. He knew it wasn't a bear because most bears in that part of Wisconsin are black. And he said this was a reddish brown animal. And it was tall enough that he could see that it was taller than he was. He says that he's about 5'8". So it was taller than him. And the closer he got, the more quiet the animal got. And then it took off running. So he says,
wow.
He actually says, I have been haunted for 5 years by my experience because I do not know what that was. He's lived in that area forever, seen lots of wildlife in that area, has no idea what that could possibly have been.
That seems to be a recurring theme too among people who have experienced stuff like this, is that they're truly haunted by it. Like it's all they think about. And that uncertainty, because you're sort of taught that this stuff can't be real. And then when you experience it for yourself, are you crazy?
Right.
Are you, did you really see it? And so that's like super interesting. I would have been nervous. I'm not going to lie. I would have been nervous, but I would have been fascinated by watching whatever it was. I thought it was interesting too. It was banging its shoulder against the tree.
Yeah, he thought it was either its head or its shoulder against the tree while it was making noise.
Wow. So, interesting.
Yeah. So if we go back to the last 3 that have been reported in Wisconsin, each one has a little bit different flavor to it. In Oneida County, it was in 2019 when this one was reported, and it was in Oneida County. Oneida County, again, up north, and it was July 7th of that year. Basically, this person had a brother and a sister with them, and they were out driving down the road. And as they're driving down the road, they came to a clearing. They saw a large, reddish-brown, upright figure running along the edge of the trees in the distance. Seemed to be hunched over as it ran, too large to be a deer, plus it was on its hind legs, kind of thing. Not proper height or gait for a bear. They've grown up in that area as well, so they understood that. Only saw it for a moment before my view was obstructed by brush, and I wasn't sure what they saw. They were so kind of blown away by it that they pulled over and had a discussion and asked their brother what he saw. big, hairy, reddish-brown figure with no neck, no muzzle, which I think is interesting too, because a bear, just like a dog, has a muzzle, right?
Right.
So it did not have a muzzle, thick and too tall to be a deer as well, standing upright on the edge of the woods. He estimated it to be about 6 feet in height and said he saw it look over its shoulder before it ran into the woods. So another report of that was actually considered a Class A. And after checking with them, this group actually does a really nice job of investigating. They really felt like their information was credible. This individual was an ex-police officer and a current pastor of a church.
Well, see, that's the thing. I mean, you're getting reports from people who are well-known, upstanding people in their community. You're talking about pastors. You're talking about police officers. You're talking about corrections officers, hunters who know the woods. They know their own land. And so I'm just kind of blown away by some of these stories. These are great stories.
The next one I want to tell you about happened in 2021, and this was reported in Washington County. So that's that county I was telling you about between Milwaukee and Oshkosh.
Okay.
And so this individual was reporting that it happened on what's known as Pleasant Hill Road. The report says, my son reported seeing a two-legged large figure covered in fur at about 8:30 on July 18th while he was driving eastbound on Pleasant Hill Road. The figure was standing right next to a tree on the south side of the road close to the shoulder. He said he also caught eye shine and the eyes were very large. He saw it for about 5 seconds while driving. His headlights caught it, and he's 100% positive he saw something interesting. They went back about 45 minutes later to investigate the site. They took the dog with them.
Okay.
The dog is a hunting dog, and the dog would not go near the area. It was shying away and whimpering at that time.
Yeah.
Investigator says that they talked to both the father and the son, found them to be credible. The father, apparently a very well-known businessman in that area, and is felt to be kind of a pillar of the community down there. So for this person, again, to come forward and report, it's kind of interesting.
Yes, agreed.
And the final one I want to tell you about, and that, by the way, was also a Class A. Now, I don't know what makes them Class A's and Class B's in this situation because there was no actual evidence of it. And I'm about to tell you a story about one that does have some evidence with it. That's a Class B. This one happened in October of last year. So just over a year ago, this one took place. And this took place in Vilas County, again, very far north in an area that's known as Manitowish Waters in Wisconsin. And they were out duck hunting. It was another hunter. And in a very remote marsh area, he saw what was basically a large figure running through the thicket of the marsh and felt like it knew that he was there. And this individual actually was able to pull out a smartphone and grab some video of it and pictures. And this is a situation where the pictures, you know, again, it's one of those situations where the pictures are like, meh.
Right.
That could be like a big log hanging there. But if you take the pictures and you look at them in succession, you can actually see the thing moving. And it does look like either a person or something else. There apparently is video with this. It has not been uploaded to the report yet because they're still verifying whether or not it could be credible. But as of right now, according to the report from the BFRO, they truly believe that this could be a sighting in this area. The man that they interviewed, apparently they felt was credible. At the time the report was posted, the witness had not been able to send the original video. We are waiting for that and we'll upload that at that time. At this point, we believe this witness to be very reliable. The witness was sure this running figure would have been able to see him, so it was likely fleeing away from him toward the nearest tree cover to the south of his position. And they actually have, the guy was smart enough to actually get like a Google Map correspondent position. So you can actually Google Map all the way into the area where this took place. And again, it's not far from the border of Wisconsin and Michigan. It's right at the top. But this was a Class B, which I found a little interesting only because there was some visual evidence to kind of corroborate what was being said.
Yeah, that is very interesting. When was this sighting again?
This sighting was in October of last year, 2021.
Okay, so this was really recent.
That's the most recent in Wisconsin.
You know, two things. Number one, I find it so interesting that a lot of the sightings there, and I guess a lot of the sightings in New York as well, I never thought of it until you brought it up, but our northern New York, northern Wisconsin, up near the Canadian border, up closer to Canada than to, say, Illinois or Pennsylvania, you know. And of course, the Northeast is a hotbed for these sightings anyways, either way. But I do find it interesting that there's a lot of them concentrated towards the north of the states, towards Canada. And of course, Canada sees has a lot of sightings, reported sightings as well. And I can only think that a lot of this is that if these creatures do indeed exist, that they've adapted to the climate that is afforded to them in these specific areas, you know, the wooded, the winters, you know, and the other thing that's really cool, and we know Wisconsin has a gazillion lakes and ponds, and, you know, again, like New York, there's water everywhere, shelter, you know, food, shelter, source of drinking, of source of water. It's just super interesting to me that it sort of does kind of follow that path north. The other thing that I thought was interesting, too, is that the people who are sure of what they saw are sure of what they saw. A really quick story. I was coming home from work years ago when I was in the banking industry. I worked a little bit later shift because it was international banking. And I worked until 8 p.m. And I was coming home. It was a warm, summery night. I was coming home a little bit after 8, about 10 after 8, and I was on this windy road, and it wasn't that rural. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. There were plenty of houses around, although it was near more woods. It was near a water source, that kind of thing. And about 100 yards in front of my car, something was dusk, like really light, though. It wasn't really dark yet. Something ran across the road. And this is just my mental way of trying to figure it out as quickly as I could, the process. But at first I thought it was a rabbit because of the way it kind of hopped.
Yep.
And then I thought it was a cat because the closer I got to it, I realized it was much larger than a rabbit, but it wasn't a cat. And then I realized that its hind end was much taller than its front end. And all of a sudden my mind went, it's a bobcat.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a bobcat. And then a few years later, Dave and I were in Vermont. And we were on a back road. And sure enough, there was a bobcat that I could actually, I mean, this bobcat was like right near us. And I could put the two together. But there is a process of determining mentally what you're looking at. And so it's very interesting that some people aren't sure, but then there are some people who are sure, and they are sure of what they saw.
That's so funny because that's exactly like the extra notes that I had jotted down were about the fact that this guy did what we do when we investigate for ghosts. Right. So he basically said he saw this thing was strange, blah, 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 blah. Said it was a long way away, seemed very, very black or brown, large and fast. We have bear, moose, wolves, occasional elk. It wasn't that. So my first thought was it could be a guy riding on a bike because apparently to him, this thing was almost floating across the water. It was going so fast.
Mm-hmm.
So what does he do? He goes down there. He's a hunter. He knows how to track, looks for any four-wheelers, any bikes, any of that. None of that was there.
That's
he
right.
could see none of that. So he said, I guess, and I guess the video's not that good because apparently somewhere in the report here, and I didn't see this before, but the report said that they will upload it at some point. I appreciated the fact that he went and investigated it, you know, like you said, you weren't sure what you were seeing and then you figured it out.
Yes. And that's so important because even the people that were in the car and saw something running at the edge of the field, what did they do? They said, well, it can't be a deer. It can't be a bear. We know what the bears, how their gait is. We know what deer's gait. We know what it isn't. Now, what the hell is it? You know, but that's a step further. It's debunking. It's saying what it isn't. And so when I saw the bobcat, eventually I knew it wasn't a rabbit. It wasn't a cat, you know, and it's that same process. And these people who are sure are completely sure. I think that's so fascinating.
I then I wanted to do an additional search for Bigfoot statues around the state and get a list of where they. And I'll be honest with you, they're all over the place. I'm very surprised that there are that many in Wisconsin. Some of them are as ordinate. They're as specific and beautiful as the one that you were standing next to. In fact, a lot of them look exactly like your boyfriend.
Yeah.
And then there are other ones that are, you know, carved in wood and all that kind of stuff. But I wanted to put one little like post note here about Bigfoot in Wisconsin, because if you look up Bigfoot in Wisconsin, you'll get all the Bigfoot reports and all blah, blah, blah. But you'll also find out about a Native American Indian chief whose name was Bigfoot. And that will also bring up his statue, which stands in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. That is down near the southern border as well, down near Illinois. And he was part of the Potawatomi tribe here in Wisconsin. And there is a very touching statue of him in Lake Geneva. It's him standing there with an oar in his hand, and it's entitled Last Look. And what it is supposed to depict is him looking over the lake before being forced to move to a reservation.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at Bigfoot, there's Bigfoot high schools, there's actually high school teams called Bigfoot and all that. And I thought in doing my first initial research on it was like, oh, they're calling it after the Sasquatch. And it turns out, no, a lot of those are named after this American Indian chief. So that's another side of the story, which is totally not related other than the name. That took me down a whole nother rabbit hole of finding out about him and where he was from and how, it's a sad story, which happened hundreds of times across our country. Right. With these tribes and stuff like that. It was just heartbreaking to read and then to see the statue. And one of the people mentioned on here, they're like, I've gone by this statue so many times and I've never stopped. I never had any idea of the story. And now my life has changed.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And in a weird, really ironic way, it's a beautiful story because somebody thought enough to create and place this statue in his honor and memory. And people took it seriously enough that they named things after this amazing person, this human being who deserved much more than he was given. Right. And, you know, we're planning on coming out again next fall, and we're going to most likely we're going to fly into Green Bay. Right. We're going to do Syracuse, Chicago, Green Bay instead of Appleton, because we all know what happened last year. But if we were driving up again, I would most certainly be stopping there to pay my respects. I think that's actually a very sad story, but a very beautiful story, and that people cared enough to try in some way in modern times to make it as right as they possibly could. I am so proud of you because you said Green Bay 3 times and you said it correctly. Thank you. Well, you kind of, we have this whole conversation in the car last year. Well, we did, because a lot of people who are not from Wisconsin will say Green Bay. Right. And the emphasis is not on green, it's on bay. So it's Green Bay. There's another city in Wisconsin, in Washington County, by the way, which is where that Sasquatch was spotted, known as West Bend. Again, it's a lot of people from outside of the state will say West Bend. And it's West Bend. So I was just very proud of you because, you know. Thank you. I said it 3 times in a row, too. I'm pretty proud of myself. But maybe we should, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the research on this. Maybe we should see if there's any Bigfoot hunts in Door County next year when we come out. And maybe we can go on a Bigfoot hunt. What do you think?
Oh, Christ.
We're already making the lighthouse rounds. So this time maybe we'll do some Bigfooting as well. But that was wonderful. Thank you. Because I didn't know any of that stuff. You kind of pay attention to the most well-known, and I'm using air quotes, well-known sightings, but you don't really know much about what goes on in your own state or the state, a state I've been to now a few times and actually really enjoy and really like, and it kind of adds a whole new dimension to being there. So very, very cool.
It really just, when you look at these, and I think if you have any interest in this at all, and you just kind of want to look up your area, the BFRO.net website is so good to go to.
Oh my gosh.
And it's not overly fancy, but you can dial in and look at counties by state. And then I think the other thing that's cool too is once you've kind of, gotten through that and you're kind of tired of looking at that stuff, like you said, you can move out, and the reports from Canada are crazy, and so there's just so much you can look at. And if you want to go on a tour, they tell you where some of the tours are at and stuff like that too.
Which is so cool.
Yeah. There's actually expeditions planned for 2023. Texas has some, California, Kentucky, New Jersey. Let's see if there's one in Wisconsin. Not in Wisconsin, which is sad. But
I know.
And some of them are already full for next year because so many people go.
You never know. Like, we have a Bigfoot Society in New York. There may be one in Wisconsin. You can always reach out to them and see what they're doing and keep up with them. And who knows? I do think it's so interesting. And like I said earlier in this episode, I had no real idea and no real clue about Bigfoot, just kind of an interest in it until we got through the season. And now that we're kind of in the home stretch, I'm finding out a lot. And I'm starting to see my thoughts and opinions sort of sway one way or the other. The more you find out, you're right, it is kind of a rabbit hole. You kind of go down it, and then the more you learn, the more you want to learn. And so this is really actually interesting. And like I said, we've gotten some great feedback on it. People are enjoying hearing these stories. And so I say to everybody, no matter what state you're in, no matter what country you're in, because we do have listeners in other countries, look it up. See what you can find out, whether it's the Yowie or the Yeti, the abominable snowman, Bigfoot. Look it up and see what you can find out about it. I love it. I just love it. And if anybody has any thoughts or opinions like Chris does, send them to us. Either email us or send us a message on our socials, and we'll be doing our spiel in just a sec. And you can find out all the information there.
You can find the Sandy and Toddcast on any of the platforms that you normally find your podcasts, including YouTube and Twitter. Be sure to like the Sandy and Toddcast on Facebook to keep up on the latest goings-on, including each week's episode. You can also join our group, Stay Weirdos, Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast, for more fun. Stay Weirdos is a safe place to share your thoughts, feelings, ideas, and random inappropriate memes without judgment. Sandy and Todd also have a podcast called The Empathicary Podcast. It's for empaths, by empaths. And if you know an empath, you might want to listen too. Find and like the page on Facebook. And finally, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast and just aren't sure where to start, Sandy and Todd can also help with that too. Mindgarden Media is their latest project where the dynamic duo can guide you every step of the way in your podcasting journey. Editing, producing, and consulting is what they do. Like Mindgarden Media on Facebook or email them at themindgardenmedia@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for staying weird.
And next week, we talk about people who've reached out and given their opinion. There's nobody more opinionated.
I'm laughing already.
It'll be a good episode because we've got friends from our apps group who have been on with us several times, and we've been on their podcast, and they're ghost hunters, but they do the cryptid thing too, and Damon's brought up some very interesting thoughts on all this too.
Most definitely, yeah. And so APS, Adirondack Park Paranormal Society, we are members, and they are friends of ours, and they are just characters that we adore so much. And we're going to do, a mini roundtable for next week's episode. And they're right in the heart of the Adirondacks, so we'll have to see if they've experienced anything, or I think there's one kind of funny story I want them to maybe tell us at some point during the episode. So that'll be something to look forward to.
Just spring it on them. Don't tell them that we're going to ask them, because we're recording tomorrow, so I don't think they'll have a chance to listen to this episode before we record. So it'll be perfect. Perfect.
Yes. It's going to be great. So thank you guys for everything. And wow, 5 episodes down in this season, and it's going to be a really cool season next time too. So not letting the cat out of the bag just yet, but it's going to be a really cool season.
Till next time. Bye.
Bye.